Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Oh my God, I can't believe that. What am I looking at? What is that in the sky? Look at that strange object. It's just standing still. I don't understand it. It's absolutely otherworldly. It couldn't possibly have been made here on Earth. But what is that? It's surrounded by helicopters. I don't understand it. What would they be doing surrounded by military helicopters? All these black helicopters, and they seem to be leading the object off. Tim, can you explain this to me?
I don't know, but if you look closely enough on the bottom there, Tim, I think it says Made in Japan. Huh.
Or China.
Yeah, China. I don't know, Tim. I don't think it's an extraterrestrial craft.
Oh, I don't know. It looks
could be
strange.
Wrong.
But you talk about made in China. That's about the only country I don't think that I've heard where UFOs, terrestrial UFOs, might be made. I mean, we've heard everything over the years. Of course, some people said the Russians were doing it. You and I tend to believe it might be some leftover German technology. Japanese, I think Nick Redford goes for that one, but Chinese and UFOs, I don't know. I haven't heard that one, but we're going to hear a lot of strange things tonight. I'm sure. I mean, maybe not so strange to us, but as our listeners close in and turn up the volume, we're going to really throw some wild information at them. Speculation, perhaps, but backed by some very solid evidence, because our two guests this evening are very well plugged in to the secret space program. Would you say that, Tim?
Oh, yes, definitely. And you know, when we talk about the secret space program, you know, we're not talking about the secret space program that I guess was recently featured in the MUFON conference.
My God! Oh
no,
I don't want to scream.
Well, but I think our guests have a lot more going on for them on the veracity of their information. So you know, if you want to know about the secret space program, you know, the Exploring the Bizarre, you know, that's the show to listen to.
Well, that's our show. So why don't you tell us who's going to be joining us this evening, and we'll get on with the show.
My pleasure, Tim. Well, we have with us tonight Linda Zimmermann and Michael SCHRATT. Now, Linda, who has been on our show before, is a research chemist turned award-winning author of 30 books on science, history, the paranormal, and fiction. Her Ghost Investigator series of books led to comic books based on her cases, and her novel, Hudson Valley Zombie Apocalypse, I love that name, was turned into a graphic novel. And she also starred in an award-winning documentary, In the Night Sky, based on her research into UFO sightings in the Hudson Valley. And one of her books that we've talked about previously is More Hudson Valley UFOs. And our other guest tonight is Michael SCHRATT. Michael is a military aerospace historian who has lectured across the country on the subject of mystery aircraft and classified propulsion systems that are buried deep within the military-industrial complex. Michael has developed a number of contacts who have firsthand experience dealing with the whole classified, you know, black budget programs, including former United States Air Force pilots, retired naval personnel, and aerospace engineers who have maintained a top secret Q magic clearance. So, Michael, Linda, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Wow. I can't wait to get into this, and I think I'll start out, Michael. We have met, but and of course I've listened to a few of your lectures, but I don't really know too much, if anything, about your background. Did you start out as a UFO investigator who believed in the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis? Do you still believe in that? Now, I notice we have a manuscript that you wrote that's on the internet about crashed UFO retrievals, so that does come to mind. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, no problem. 35 years ago, I guess the best place to start would be at the Oshkosh Air Show in Wisconsin, where I had been going for decades now. And it's really the largest air show in the world, and always fascinated by aircraft, and just wanted to find out what was going on behind the scenes. Aircraft that you might see at an air show, I started piecing it together that this could be 20, 30, 40 years already obsolete. I wanted to know what was going on behind the scenes, where our tax dollars are disappearing, what type programs are exempt from congressional oversight and public scrutiny, and that was the start of my research.
Now, how about as far as like UFOs go? Did you have a little background in that, or had read on the subject?
I certainly read on the subject, but being close to 2457 West Peterson Avenue, which is the headquarters for QFOS, I was given access to their vast 60,000 archive file collection, and I spent about 3 years going through all 60,000 cases, picking out the best cases that had a multi-page description and a very good sketch, and that was kind of the genesis of the research.
Well, we are, speaking of QFOS and Dr. Hynek, we are celebrating this week the anniversary of the release of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
That's right.
The movie is back in the theaters in limited release for a week, and it was an exciting film when it came out. I know it's one of the movies that I've seen more than once, quite a few times. I never seem to get tired of it. I probably have it in 3 different DVD format. Did you ever believe that UFOs were extraterrestrial? That some of them are, or do you believe that today?
I keep an open mind, but I also know that a significant majority of aircraft that we might see in the sky that are perhaps identified as extraterrestrial UFOs are definitely, in point of fact, a number of deep black programs procured by the military-industrial complex, specifically Lockheed Martin, Boeing Phantom Works, Northrop, McDonnell Douglas, which has been taken over by Boeing. So at this point, it's reached a factor where the form, fit, and function of these craft mimic the actual article. So it's hard to tell the difference at this point.
Okay, so you are saying that maybe there some of these craft that we see that we interpret as being, I say extraterrestrial. I don't even believe that they're extraterrestrial. I think they're interdimensional or something else. But we're going to just use that phrase to cut to the chase. Do you think that some of these craft, like I started out with my little skit there, the Crash-Landrum case. I mean, do you think that some of these craft have been back engineered?
That's the $64 million question that we're all trying to answer. That's a difficult bridge to cross. I don't have any physical evidence to make that leap. I'm open to it, but what I try to do is I look at the physical characteristics based on the eyewitness reports of what they're seeing, what they're identifying, and when you put that together as a tapestry, you start getting a pattern recognition, and you can start to see this jigsaw unraveling itself. Just to give you a couple of quick examples.
Yes.
If you look at the bottom understructure of the Hudson Valley Boomerang, and also the bottom understructure of the Belgium Triangle 1989-1990, and also the Southern Illinois Triangle January 5th, 2000. They all exhibit this similar characteristics. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm open to the ET hypothesis, but just by looking at the structure, the function of these vehicles. We're seeing tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of these craft. We're hearing a low-frequency electrical humming noise like a transformer or a sewing machine. We're seeing multicolored flashing lights on the bottom of these craft, but not random or haphazard. We're seeing a very distinctive pattern of reds going off, blues going off, yellows going off, greens going off, up and down the length of these flying boomerang-shaped craft. So when you put this all together, and the fact that a lot of these craft test flights are done on Thursday nights, a significant number of Hudson Valley boomerang sightings happen on Thursday nights, we can start seeing that there may be a man-made component to this, but I always keep an open mind because, as Linda has pointed out in her multiple books, sightings of these craft in the Hudson Valley, New York area date back prior to 1900. So Lockheed Skunkworks wasn't invented that. So someone's building these.
Well, now let's get to the Crash-Landrum case. I mean, that's the
sure.
one. That's the one that comes to mind. First when I think about Earth-made saucers, because it was surrounded by military helicopters, and there were several witnesses. There were two ladies in the car, and a young boy who I've actually heard on the air. He has done a couple of podcast, and he sticks pretty much with the original story. They were driving along. Was it in Texas, right?
Huffman, Texas, December 29th, 1980.
Okay,
yes.
you tell us a little, because you probably know it a lot more better than I do, because it's up your alley.
It was December 29th, 1980, when Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Colby Landrum were driving down kind of a deserted, dark road after 9 p.m., and it was Colby who identified the craft first. He saw this brilliantly lit white light approaching the vehicle, and then all of a sudden, and this put the fear of God in all three of the eyewitnesses. I mean, they thought that this was something otherworldly. They were horrified. This thing parked itself no more than 150 feet in front of their vehicle. They were horrified. They were scared. Betty eventually got out of her vehicle, went to the forward portion of her car, and was watching this for well over a minute. And what it looked like was two ice cream cones stacked end to end with the thick ends connecting each other. And this thing was bobbing above the concrete paved section there, and every time it would go up, the flames would come out of the bottom of it, and then as it was bobbing down, the flame would go off. And so it looks like something was going on with the propulsion system. Immediately after this sighting took place, they all suffered the effects of acute radiation sickness and poisoning. So there was definitely a man-made component. As you mentioned, there were 23 double-rotor CH-47 Chinook helicopters that were shepherding this craft, along with what we believe to be a Sikorsky Sky Crane and two UH-1 attack helicopters. Absolutely a man-made component to this, and this isn't the first time that helicopters have been seen shepherding aircraft in the Texas area. So there's a pattern recognition here as well.
The officials with the Air Force, when questioned about this, said this couldn't have been anything of ours because this was during a holiday, and everybody was home with their families.
All I would say to that is, if you look at the Atomic Energy Commission, the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy, by 1960, they already spent $990 million on the NEPA program. That's the Nuclear Energy for Propulsion of Aircraft. By 1960, they already blew almost $1 billion of R&D funding on it. Now, they got something for their money, and it certainly appears that there was a whole breach in the reactor, and fissionable material started spewing out of the bottom of this craft, and this is what perhaps caused the radiation sickness.
Do you know, did anybody else report any UFO sightings that evening in the general area?
Other eyewitnesses beside those three that saw it, so it wasn't just them. And here's the interesting part. When you talk to John Schuessler about this, he's a bit close-hold about this case, but he will tell you that when he got there, he took photographs of the scorched concrete pavement, and then we found out later that the Army Corps of Engineers came in and they dug up the pavement and repaved it. And then 2 weeks later, they came back and they did it again. They dug up the road a second time. So right there, it tells you that the government involvement.
All right. If this was a secret black project aircraft, has there been any scuttlebutt on where it may have originated from and where it was escorted to afterwards?
From what I've been able to determine, that this was basically a stealthy troop transport out of Gray Army Airfield, I believe. That's the origin point. And there is some indication that seems to basically support the theory that there's an underground facility there, because we've had Cessna 172 pilots that have made emergency landings on these very strange runways there. So that was procured within the Leonard Stringfield reports.
Yeah, I had actually heard somewhere along the line that this aircraft may have actually been intended to use in Iran during the ill-fated rescue attempt. That it was going to it was supposed to come in and basically act as like a decoy and blind everybody, and then the real helicopters would come in and.
That's possible. I would also want to mention, too, that during this whole scene that this was taking place, this craft was making a very loud beeping noise as this was all going on. And after this event took place, the United States Army contacted Betty Cash and personally offered to buy her car. So I just wonder why.
and she didn't sell.
I don't think she sold it, no. But she was a crusader all the way to the end.
Well, yeah, she actually took the government to court.
Right. That's right.
Or was it the military? I can't remember which, or maybe both. And didn't the government actually offer to settle out of court?
Not that I'm aware of. The judge never heard their case. It was never heard. The course, it never went. It was never heard by a judge.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, and considering the physical symptoms that they all exhibited after the fact. I mean, they definitely had encountered something. You can't tell me that the loss of hair, the cancer, the handprint that basically had been melted into the dashboard.
Very well done. Yes.
Yeah, during the event, yet. It was really ignored. People just like, oh yeah, haha. Sure it happened. It boggles my mind how, and as you well know, this has not been the only case where such physical evidence has come about from close encounters like that, and it just tends to be ignored.
I agree with you, because this really ranks up there as one of the top 3 UFO cases within this field, and yet it's almost totally forgotten. And it's right up there at the top. It has all the parameters of a class 1 case, and yet it's almost completely forgotten.
Now, how far back would you say within? Now, I mean, the Air Force, I know, really didn't begin until like 1947, but you have the Army Air Force. How far back do you think we can go when it comes to producing, experimenting, researching these types of exotic types of aircraft?
I'd have to say from the very beginning. Very beginning. Yep. And but what I like to focus in on, the origin point for me on the modern day classified black programs starts in 1977 with the first test flight of the Lockheed Have Blue proof of design concept demonstrator at Groom Lake Area 51 with Ben Rich and Kelly Johnson watching the whole thing take place. That is the origin point of the black program research, as far as I'm concerned, for modern day research.
And the Have Blue, that was an early prototype of stealth aircraft, am I right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So, okay, now why do you think that is, for you, that's the beginning?
because that's the point where Lockheed started having a liaison with the higher ups in Pentagon brass, because they were signing the checks for the Skunkworks in Burbank. And from that point forward, at that point, we ran into the Reagan administration and the Reagan buildup from 1981 to 1989. We can talk about that later on, but that's the origin point. And then the Reagan buildup is when it really started branching off from there.
Well, Michael, what I wonder about though is if we do have these exotic craft, why don't we use them? I mean, we use them to fly over the Hudson Valley or over Phoenix or over some small town in Texas. Why don't we use them where it counts?
Let me try to break this down for you. And this comes from my good friend Mark McCandler, so I got to give credit to him. But when we talk about these black programs and why we use some and we don't use the others, he reckons this as being 3 tiers of technology. So tier number 1 is your common, ordinary garden variety vanilla flavored aircraft like your F-15, F-16, F-14. Tier 2 are previous black programs which have been declassified into the so-called white world. Now, for example, that would be the F-117 stealth fighter, B-2 stealth bomber, Boeing Phantom Works bird of prey. Tier 3 are classified, unacknowledged special access programs which have virtually no congressional oversight and circumvent the established laws of physics, kind of like the Belgium Triangle, Hudson Valley Boomerang, and the TR-3B, or the Teledyne Ryan 3B. So those are the 3 categories or the 3 tiers of technology.
Well, I mean, are they ever going to tell the public about this, or is it always going to remain a closely guarded, classified secret?
Well, the last time we had something unveiled for us as taxpayers of a manned black program was during the Bush administration in 2002 when Boeing Phantom Works bird of prey was declassified. That's the last time we've had anything. So we're well overdue for something to be unveiled, but I don't see anything coming up in the near future.
Well, I remember hearing on the news, I guess this goes back maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't mark it down, that there was an aircraft they said was able to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast in 15 minutes. But then you never heard anything more about it.
Well, you can talk to Linda, because if you look at Hudson Valley Boomerang and Night Siege, we have these cases going from horizon to horizon in under 2 seconds, so that's even better than that technology. Well,
we will be doing that when we come back from our first break on Exploring the Bizarre in a very fascinating subject.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with 2 of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, Tim, before we continue, I did want to give a shout out to our friends in the Caribbean. We have actually a few listeners in the Virgin Islands, and of course along the path that the hurricane is taking up through Florida. We wish them to be safe and sound, and that their homes not be destroyed, and that everything work out for everybody. And perhaps if we put enough effort and concentrate on it, maybe we can turn the hurricane a little bit to the offshore, so it doesn't hit Miami directly. Anyway, now, I am of the opinion, of course, that some of these objects could be manufactured here on Earth. Now, I go a little bit back further than that. Tim, you and I have written about this in books like the Nazi Time Travelers book that we recently put out, that the Germans, as far back as the 1920s, were doing research and channeling information supposedly from beings from some other solar system, and giving them information on how to build disc-shaped craft. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that there is a considerable bit of evidence that at least some of the early UFO reports involved craft of this type, and we outlined that, of course, in our several of our books. So I do think that we do have both that we're dealing with here, but certainly the what goes on as far as the UFO sightings go. Not all these craft are necessarily physical in the sense. Some of them even appear to be interdimensional in origin. I mean, the things that they do are even beyond, I think, any technology that we might have at this time, or even within the next 30 or 40 years, if they're playing this kind of catch-up game on us. Now, Linda Zimmermann, we've had her on the program before. She is an authority on the Hudson Valley UFO sightings that were big in the 1980s, and I do believe that they persist to this day because she's written a number of books on the subject. Now, the objects that we're seeing, Linda, over the Hudson Valley, especially this triangular shaped device, or boomerang, as it's been called. What are your feelings as to its points of origin?
Well, I think that we have a mixed bag, because certainly the things Michael talks about make a lot of sense. The craft that had the beams and the valves, and people described looking like tinker toys, or construction sets put together. Certainly, they seem to be man-made. And bolstering that is that there were two groups of pilots in the area who were trying to hoax appearing to be UFOs. A group of Cessna pilots who called themselves the Martians, and a group of ultralight pilots who were risking their licenses and careers by flying illegally at night. Ultralights are not allowed to fly at night. And despite massive evidence, having the tail numbers of planes, having the identities of some of these pilots, nothing was ever done. It seemed to at least be tacit approval by government agencies here, who easily could have cracked down on these pilots and stopped it, because it was very dangerous what they were doing, because you had people stopping their cars in the middle of busy highways and getting out. You had people getting into accidents. You had, there was a case of one pregnant woman who almost drove off the road. So what they were doing was foolish if it was just a prank. But some of the things I have heard is that they were encouraged, let's say, certainly not discouraged from doing what they were doing, because it muddied the waters of whatever was actually flying. And government agencies and police agencies, anytime anybody called, could just say, "Oh, it's those pilots again, those hoaxing pilots," and dismiss it as that. So to this day, in fact, I gave a lecture just a couple of hours ago locally here, and the subject of the pilots came up. Oh, wasn't that whole era just these pilots flying in formation? So it was an extremely effective disinformation act that 30 plus years later is still effective. So if you were flying some sort of black ops craft, that would be a great way to put the disinformation out there, put up a cover story, and you can continue to do what you were doing with impunity. However, on the other hand, these types of craft had been seen for many decades previously. And another thing that I think is shows that I don't know that they could have all been government craft, is the huge variety of shapes and sizes. Rectangles, triangles, discs, cigars, big triangles, little triangles, literally dozens and dozens of various shapes and sizes.
And for what purpose? I mean, why would the secret government? Why would they want to fly objects over the Hudson Valley? I mean, why do that? I mean, just to see what reaction they would get. That seems like I was going to say waste of taxpayers' money, but that wouldn't be the first time.
No, it wouldn't. And we could debate all night the alleged wisdom of the government on many topics, but perhaps they had their purposes. But why take something the size of a football field, cover it in bright lights, and park it over a major highway for 20 minutes if it's a black ops project? It doesn't make sense to me, but then again, how are we to know the workings of the government? But I can say that some government aircraft have been flown over the Hudson Valley, and somewhat recently, you've probably heard of Woodstock, and a couple of years ago, there were quite a few sightings of large triangular aircraft with kind of a greenish glow that seemed to be have like a green beam between the large aircraft and some kind of smaller aircraft behind it, almost as if it was guiding. Somehow it was using this beam of light to guide this other aircraft through the mountains of the Catskills. And local police and sheriffs were like, well, what's going on here? We need some answers. And they were kind of getting stonewalled, but apparently the sheriff for this one area was told that aircraft that was going to be used in Afghanistan was being tested in the Catskills because the terrain was very similar. So they apparently have some sort of remotely guided aircraft that was being tested in the Hudson Valley.
Well, and that's there's the rub right there. Okay, the reports was that you had an aircraft surrounded by this greenish glow, which made it very obvious from the ground. You have the older reports from the Hudson Valley with these black triangles that are so brightly lit, that you can't mistake them for anything except something that's really unusual. Yet we have numerous reports of people seeing these things flying over their neighborhood, and the only way that they could tell that there was something overhead was that something giant is blocking out the stars. So unless that there is something about the propulsion system that makes them glow in the dark, once again, like you said, we could speculate for days. Why are these things so brightly lit that it's almost like they're just, asking to be noticed?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I just wrote an article recently about the blacked out aircraft, and my point was we need to pay more attention to those because they did not want to be seen. And there was a great story. Man was going to take out his garbage, and he put on his mother had installed this unbelievably bright spotlight and aimed it straight out so it illuminated part of the sky. And as he's walking out the door, he said it was like something out of Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica, a massive, massive ship that took many, many seconds to pass over. And it was very low, no lights, nothing to indicate, that it wanted to be seen. And if it hadn't been for that spotlight his mother had installed, he said he doesn't even think he would have noticed it because it made absolutely no sound. and yet here was this thing. He thought it was as big as 3 football fields passing silently over him. So
that just gives me the creeps. Thinking about that, something that big flying that low overhead.
And not making a single sound, no air disturbance, nothing. So was this a government, project where they didn't want anybody to see it? So, we can talk all night back and forth about, do they want them to, do they want to be seen? Do they not want to be seen? Is this stealth, not stealth? So I think we're dealing with a lot of different things. And also in what I like to concentrate are on sightings that couldn't possibly have been military aircraft. And that came about with a group of sightings I uncovered from 1908 to 1910 throughout the Hudson Valley, up through New England, up into southern Canada. So clearly it could not have been, black ops projects, black projects for the military that early on.
Mm-hmm. What were these craft known to do? I mean, how many witnesses saw them, and what parts of the area?
It started in Bristol, Connecticut in 1908. In 1909, in the Hudson Valley during the summer, thousands of witnesses saw these craft. They were very large. They had from 1 to 3 lights, very large spotlights. Many people said it looked as though they were looking for something. They had their flight characteristics where they could hover silently. They could move off extremely fast. They were seen some nights in the air for as long as 4 hours and at heights of many thousands of feet. Michael can probably speak to this better than I can, but from my research, one of the Wright brothers had set an altitude record of 361 feet at that time period. So clearly we didn't have airplanes that could go that high. No airplanes had yet flown at night in 1909. And certainly, if you recall what these stick and fabric planes looked like early on, they were not equipped to carry massive, heavy searchlights and the batteries that would have been required to power them. And there were groups of sightings throughout New England and southern Canada, Quebec area, around Niagara Falls, the Great Lakes area, out to the Midwest. And there was a great article I came upon where a train crew out in Peoria, Illinois, was talking about this brightly lit, which appeared to be like a cigar-shaped object that was keeping up with the train. And this is late at night. It was following the twists and turns of the train and kept up with it, and then sped off and took off. So
there have been a number of reports of UFOs pacing trains. I think, wasn't there one there in Indiana some years ago, Tim?
Yeah, there central Indiana, a train that was, I think it was either coming in from Ohio or heading out towards the Bell Fountain train yards. And also there was a case in Kentucky where the train had rounded a bend and there was a UFO over the railroad tracks, and then the train actually struck the craft and sustained, recordable damage.
And don't forget, Betty Hill had her sighting. She claimed up there in New England along the train track. So yeah, they seem to pick odd places and times to appear for sure. But Linda, where do they go to? I mean, it's like Puff the Magic Dragon, so to speak. I mean, these things are huge as you describe them. but yet they seem to appear for a period of time, a brief period of time, maybe no more than 10 or 15 minutes at one point, and then disappear somewhere and come back a couple of nights later. Where are they going?
Well, I would love to know, but one of the articles from the 1909 time period, they put it wonderfully. They said, no one knows from where they take off from or where they land. And newspapers were paying reporters lots of money to fan out across the area, find out where these things are coming from. They had to launch from somewhere, they had to land from somewhere, but no one ever found from where. And we can say the same thing throughout the last 100 years. No one knows where they take off from or where they land. And in the case of these possible enormous possible military vehicles, it's the same thing. I would love to know where in the Hudson Valley they could have possibly, something to the size of a couple of football fields could take off and then land again. You have West Point, you have Stewart Airport, but Stewart Airport is, a lot of people living around it. I don't know. I don't know where they're coming from or where they're going to.
Well, I think that's why some people have speculated that these things could actually be a form of blimp, I suppose. Type of aircraft. Why they're able to move around so silently. So I suppose that even as large as they are, they could come down and the helium or whatever's used that lifts them can be taken out, folded up, put in the back of a car, and taken away.
Well, I don't know about the back of a car if it's something the size of a football field, but
okay, maybe an 18-wheeler.
They have these things that they advertise on TV. You put your clothes in it, and it shrinks them up.
There you go. Yeah,
shrink wrap. Yeah.
Use the vacuum cleaner. Yeah.
Vacuum cleaner to
a lot of 100
them
vacuum cleaners. Well, the sound would give it away. I'm sure though that wouldn't.
And there are some rural areas, but there's a lot of people in the Hudson Valley, and certainly were in the 80s as well, and yet no one ever reported seeing one of these take off or land. They
would just I remember that time very, very distinctly. I mean, it's just like these things would just make an appearance and then they would be gone. I know that, and I can't remember what newspaper it was, there was a number of reporters who were working in their office, and they got a phone call that one of these things was heading in their direction, and they actually went to the windows and saw this massive object flying over their building. Yet when they tried to write a good report about that, they were stonewalled by their editor, who was there that night with them. But he told them that his boss had said that nah, you're not going to write about that.
Yes, that was in Poughkeepsie.
Thank you.
I've spoken to at least one of the reporters there, and he's still angry about that. It was one of the most remarkable sightings, a rooftop full of reporters and cameramen getting the story of their lives, and they were not allowed to write about it.
Well, they could certainly write about it now.
Well, and he is. He has told his, at least one of them has told his story. But again, why couldn't you talk about it?
Yeah. I mean, even if it were a military aircraft, I mean, talking about it doesn't prove that it is. I mean, people are still going to be skeptical about it either way. I mean, some people are going to believe that they're military. Some people are going to believe that they're extraterrestrials. Some people are going to think it's all a bunch of nonsense. I mean, so there you go. Of course, though, in the Hudson Valley, you've got so many people that saw these things, and there were people who said that they were, ultralights. I remember I had a conversation with Joe Bouchard from Blue Oyster Cult, because he's friends with Peter Robbins and Peter Robbins, his late sister Helen Wheels, who wrote a lot of songs for the band. And he said, I saw those things. I don't know why they're getting all excited about it. They were ultralights. Well,
well,
so
but you could tell though from the ground if you were dealing with planes. So I saw a film that somebody had taken of these planes or ultralights going overhead, and you could distinctly hear the motors, and then it was compared to one of the actual triangular shaped craft, which was producing no sound at all. So big difference.
Well,
just tonight I was speaking to someone who said, he saw back in '88, he saw a massive silent rectangle, which was a fairly early rectangle sighting for this area. And he said, I saw those idiot pilots. He said they were noisy. They couldn't hold formation. He said there's no comparison. And I've been told that dozens and dozens of times that, people who saw the real thing, whatever that was, and the pilots, they weren't fooled. But the fact that they were up there doing that was a cover story.
Well, we're being taken over by the secret break, guys.
There you go.
So we'll be back after a momentary break and with an exciting conversation on the Secret Space Program.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking with Michael SCHRATT and Linda Zimmermann, talking about the secret space program, secret black projects, hidden aircraft, and fun stuff like that.
Crash retrievals. We got to get into that in a little while too.
That's right. Right.
Hey, but I want to throw a couple of names out, especially at Michael, to see what kind of reaction I get. Gary McKenna and Bob Lazar. Let's start with Gary McKenna. Any truth to his rather outlandish claims?
I've never met the man personally. I know a bit about his story. He was a Skype guest speaker at the MUFON Symposium in Las Vegas in July. I tend to think that there's something to it because he talks about the Navy involvement. We know that there's already been a connection with the NEPA program, so that seems to check out. As far as the huge space cruisers that he talks about, I don't put it beyond the military-industrial complex. They could certainly do it. They have the technology. The reference works talks about at least since 1954, they made a gravity breakthrough. Even Greer chimes in. He confirms that as well. So there's a pattern recognition there. I don't put it beyond these guys, but as far as anything beyond that, just not totally familiar with everything that Gary had talked about.
And Bob Lazar?
Bob Lazar, that's such a difficult thing to answer. Bottom line is, I would just go by the SR-71 pilots that flew over Groom Lake and would have definitely flown over the Papoose Range during that time frame. Not one of those SR pilots ever talked about anything being there as far as a base, as far as secret hangars opening up. You would think that the SR pilots would know because they're so intimately involved in the programs there. They never said anything about it. So that I'm just going to go by the SR pilots.
Well, I mean, would they have been allowed to say anything about it?
Good question. But, these would be the guys that would know, the best of the best, the Mach 3 SR-71 pilots. If there's anyone you can trust, it would be them. And if they were going to say something, now I do know a couple of pilots. I've spoke to them before. They've never said anything. Now, maybe they saw something, but I don't know. So at this point, it's difficult to say. But it's hard to fathom what was presented in the late 1980s by Lazar. It's just difficult to pin that down.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, for those out there who may think that this is all just a bunch of crazy talk, that we have jet aircraft and that's basically it. You wrote a very interesting piece. I have a PDF version on it called "Flying Saucers for Real," and it dealt with the mothballed and very top secret saucer-shaped aircraft that were seen at Medill Air Force Base in Florida. You want to talk about that a little bit? I've always found that case fascinating, just for the fact that if this was true, they managed to keep these aircraft so secret. Just so secret.
That story originates from a man named Jack Pickett, who is a retired U.S. Naval combat veteran. He is no longer with us, but I did spend a significant amount of time with him personally, got his story down very accurately, recorded it on videotape, multiple meetings with him. So I think we have his story. He did donate a bunch of his material to my personal collection, which I'm very thankful for. I have a lot of his original letters. Some of his information is also residing at a different historical archive as well, so he's donated at that. But bottom line is, according to Jack Pickett, it was September 1967 when they were driving along the perimeter of MacDill Air Force Base, and on the opposite side of the chain link fence, they saw four extremely rare, unusual, fascinating aircraft. Basically, they were dish-shaped craft that measured 20, 40, 70, approximately 116 feet in diameter. They all had tricycle landing gear. They had control surfaces on the circumference of the disc. There was a large vertical tail at the back end of the disc. The crew compartment was dead center at the midpoint of the craft itself that tapered back to a very high, large vertical tail in the back. And he was given access to these craft. He was able to get some photos of these craft. He was even authorized to write an article because these were being scrapped at the time. They were going to declassify these particular birds because they had quote-unquote better ones that had VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing capability. So just before going to press, according to Jack Pickett, there was an overflight of downtown Miami of one of these more advanced VTOL designs, and it caused such a ruckus in Miami that the word came from the highest echelons of the U.S. Air Force in Washington to delay or deny publication, and that's where the story died. So we were within hours of getting a good glimpse of the truth about UFOs within hours, literally within hours, and then the whole story was shelved. And so that, in a nutshell, that is the Jack Pickett story. Now, I was never able to totally confirm Jack's account, although I did speak to another combat veteran, Warren Botts, who flew in the Pacific during World War II, and he flew P-40s. And he was a Flying Tiger pilot. He claims to have seen a year earlier, 1966, the large 116-foot diameter at Hangar Bay E at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1966. So these two gentlemen, their stories kind of hooked up together, and that was the end result of that paper.
Well, and Jack had been told that these aircraft had actually been flown over the Soviet Union at the time, in reconnaissance, and were so fast that they were capable of exiting the atmosphere if they, were built to actually do that.
That's what Jack Pickett told me. Yes, I recorded his story exactly as it was told to me. So I've always been fascinated by it too. I tried for years to get a declassified photo, tried to get those dislodged from the Air Force, but I never got anywhere with it. I never got any solid feedback, and I just couldn't take the story any further. I theoretically hit a brick wall with it.
It is a fascinating story, and it just, if true, it shows that the development of these types of aircraft go way back, because these were flown probably in the early to middle 60s before they were decommissioned, and like our producer was saying during our break, if they were capable of doing that then, what do we have now?
Well, what's interesting is when Jack was being briefed about this by the adjutant general at MacDill Air Force Base, he took Jack into a highly classified library at MacDill Air Force Base where they had pictures, motion picture film reels, physical evidence, files, file drawers, hundreds of motion picture film reels. They had these things on film, on U.S. Air Force 8x10 glossy black and white photographs of these parked on the tarmac, flying in formation. They had all of it there. So that would have been one of the holy grails to go to get that physical evidence that we're looking for. And he was given access. So at one time, I don't know if it's there now, but at one time there appears to have been a repository for this type of information at MacDill. That's borne out by Leonard Stringfield, who also talks about MacDill as a place where a lot of this was taken. And so, my point is, it's been 70 years since the Kenneth Arnold sighting. It's been 70 years since Roswell. And what do we know now that we didn't know then? Do we really know more about the UFO phenomenon? Do we have an answer for Roswell, the origin of UFOs? An argument can be made. We still don't know. After 70 years, we still don't know the truth about what's going on. If we don't take matters into our own hands and make a management decision, it's just going to slip by us. We've got to do something. And this is what Gordon Cooper had talked about. He stated that the only way that this will ever come out is if the information, the physical evidence is put together and given to the scientific community as a united coalition, and they come together and go over the heads of the military-industrial complex. That's the only way we'll ever know.
But who's going to release this information?
I know, that's the thing. That's the part. It can't just be just documents. It's got to be an entire stream of evidence. We need the 8x10 glossies. We need the gun camera footage from the P-51s from World War II. We need the Vietnam footage. We need the B-29 footage.
But what again, that doesn't prove their point of origin.
Right, that's correct.
I don't know. It's just, there's just so many elements of this. Linda, I wanted to ask you, as far as the Hudson Valley sightings go, have there been any abduction reports, or are there people who claim that they have maintained some sort of contact with the beings on board these craft?
Hundreds and hundreds of them.
Hundreds, really?
Yes. I was stunned when I started my research. I didn't expect even one. I thought, well, that goes on in other places, and the stories just started coming out, and many of them, and most often they are multi-generational, and it's it's an aspect of this whole phenomena that is just stunning and undeniable. Again, I can't tell you exactly what's going on, but so many credible people. Going back to the first case I found was 1929. I interviewed a woman in her 80s who started having missing time back in 1937, and it just continues to the present day.
Well, what do you have any other stories along those lines? I mean, those are always fascinating.
I have many stories. For the most part, people will, from a very early age, for example, I'll give you one story where very early age, a man started, he thought it, his parents were saying, oh, that's just an imaginary friend you have who comes into your room at night. And he'd experience being taken out of the house and, being put on a table. Sometimes it was missing time. Sometimes he would remember it. This went on through his early 20s, 30s, before it tailed off. He had an enormous amount of psychological problems, fears and things, obviously, as a result, physical problems as a result, and he's still trying to deal with this. Very vivid recollections. These aren't all things that, hypnotic regression are coming through. These are conscious memories. And he came right out and said to me, I would shoot them all if I could. The hell they put him through. Whereas another gentleman I interviewed, he just recently found out that he and his brother 50 years ago, when they were children, had the same type of experiences, some sort of being coming to the house, taking them out. Neither of them ever talked about it, and 50 years later, one of them finally said something, and is like, "You had the same thing happen." Whereas a lot of people are terrified. He came to look at it. I liked his choice of words. He said, like when you bring a sick puppy to the vet, they're scared, but you're doing it for their own good. He actually had been very sickly and felt that these abductions, contacts, whatever you want to call it, he felt they helped him and actually saved his life. But for the most part, people see a craft, they follow it, or it follows them. 2 or 3 hours of time go by. They have no recollection. They have physical marks. They get both physical and emotional trauma from it. And it happens more than once.
Now, what kind of beings are we talking about here? I mean, is there a general consensus of what they look like, or are people reporting just all kinds of like a plethora of different types of creatures?
In the Hudson Valley here, the people who have spoken to me, it's mostly the short, whitish or grayish, big heads, large eyes. One woman told me a fascinating story. She and her girlfriend were headed to a local shopping mall. UFOs were not on their mind. They're just having a good time chatting, and they see something in the road. And she said it was about 6 foot tall, not wearing any clothes, grayish. And the way she said it, she goes, those eyes, those huge, massive eyes. That she said it was just standing there in the road staring at her. Her car passed within 1 foot of this being standing there. So they got a very clear look at it. And she said it was like it read them like a book. She just felt these piercing eyes, and she drove past. They had no idea what it was. For years, her and her friend referred to it as the Elephant Man because they had never heard about gray aliens. And it was like 20 years later.
Especially ones that are indecently exposed.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, one day she said she had moved to California. She saw a book on somebody's coffee table about gray aliens. And she says, oh, my God, that's what I saw. So it wasn't as if someone was out looking for this or had any preconceived notions. So I have honestly been stunned by the enormous amount of people who have told me similar stories over the years.
Well, now, Linda, are any messages given? And what is your take on all of this? I mean, do you have any theories as to where they might be coming from, or what their purpose is, or why they've centered in on the Hudson Valley? And not that they haven't centered in on other locations, because we know that there are other window areas or vortexes or portals or just plain good old spots that they seem to show up with again and again.
Yeah, I don't know again why Hudson Valley, but as I said, I used to work in a lab. We did experiments all the time, and certainly if you're tracking some sort of traits or just looking at a certain species over time, you want generations of the old fruit fly. Let's breed generations of a fruit fly and study their genetics. We're going back to Mendel with that. But if you're looking to study human beings, you would study generations of the same family. And, I don't know for what purpose, but I hear this time and again. I'll interview somebody and they'll tell me about their experiences. And I said, anybody else in the family? And they'll be like, no. And then they'll say, well, this probably doesn't have anything to do with it, but my grandmother told me about these experiences she had, or, my mother or father, and now my children are having this. And it's really scary. It's and either all of these hundreds of people are crazy, or there is actually something to it. I had a sighting back in '79, and I thought I knew every detail. I wasn't like these other people who didn't remember. I prided myself on remembering every single minute of it, till I found the diary entry I had written that night and found out I have an hour of absolutely no recollection. That night I was able to write that I was standing by this lake with binoculars, watching this craft zigzagging back and forth. I have absolutely no memory of that. I contacted my boyfriend at the time who was with me. He remembers at least going to the lake and has absolutely no memory of what happened after that as well. So I am not saying I was abducted, but what I am saying is that whatever energy fields are around this craft somehow managed to erase my memory. It was like reading the words of a stranger, and I still can't really come to grips with that.
Well, how about messages? Are there any messages being given out to any of these the people? I mean, are they whoever they are, making any comment as to why they might be coming here, not just to the Hudson Valley area, but to Earth in general?
Well, I know a lot of people around the world, talk about, they're telling us to take better care of the planet.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very good point. I don't recall a single person telling me there was any plan or agenda. They were just gone and came back, and they don't see any greater purpose to this, because I can't. I'll have to look into this more. I'll have to start asking that as well. But no great messages of wisdom here. Just going about their science project.
Well, that seems kind of mysterious, though, because you would, it's almost, you could look at it either way. If these things were secret devices, again, why are they appearing, at different places and not wanting to make themselves known, but yet, when they do show up, they make a point of being observed in a lot of cases, and also, if they're coming here from some other planet. Well, you would think that they would have some sort of message, or why would they keep coming back over and over and over again? If they just want to observe us, or maybe do a couple of medical experiments, I don't know as if they'd have to pick so many people. I mean, both things look very odd and peculiar. That's why we call the show Exploring the Bizarre, and we'll be back after our next and last break.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. And Michael, we have a question from the chat room that somebody was hoping that maybe you could answer. And they're asking, what about skyquakes in L.A. in 1992? 2.2 on the Richter scale, had to move at hypersonic speeds, track from Groom Lake to Mugu naval base. I remember that. I remember when all that was going on. I mean, there was a number of instances where those skyquakes were being recorded.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of my binders that I have here, and a lot of these took place on Thursday mornings, which is very interesting. I try to break this down as easily as possible. Now, a part of this story begins prior to the Challenger disaster. That's January 28th, 1986, and a part of it took place after. But for this particular storyline, I'm just going to break it down as fast as I can. Essentially, immediately after the Challenger explosion, the U.S. Air Force lost what they called its assured access to space, because a number of payloads on the shuttles were classified DoD satellites and other military applications. We still don't know to this day exactly what all those payloads were. And so when the Challenger blew up, they lost that whole capability. So as the story goes, a desperate call went out to the defense contractors on the West Coast and in St. Louis. So including Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, Rockwell International. And they were told to design, build, and test fly a 2-stage-to-orbit hypersonic space plane that could carry what they call rods from God, which are depleted uranium rounds that have no warhead on. And then they also could be used as a synthetic aperture, high-resolution imaging reconnaissance platform as well. And according to my good friend Jim Goodall, he believes that what people were seeing during the early 1990s, late 1980s, was the end result of that program called the Black Star program. And this was a nuclear proliferation monitoring aircraft. That was the mission profile of a number of these different vehicles. So that's according to Jim Goodall, and there does appear to be some good research to back that up. He has a good historical background to make that statement. So what we were dealing with here is, again, a 2-stage-to-orbit space plane consisting of a mothership that was light gray in color, operated by the CIA, the National Security Agency, as a congruent operation. That major aircraft, called the mothership, also known as Elegant Lady, was 200 feet in length, as it had a 120-foot wingspan. And just to do kind of a quick mission profile, what they would do is they would take off from Area 51. They would take up a magnetic 349-degree heading. They would basically pour the coals to the aircraft, fly near Russia, just right on the skirts of Russia. Then they make a left-hand turn going down to the Middle East area. They would look for any type of nuclear fissionable material there. Then they make another left turn, pour the coals to it right around Mach 8 to Mach 10. Then they'd hit right over Hawaii and make a left-hand turn going back to Area 51. This is all done in 3 hours. They can do this mission in under 3 hours at those type speeds.
Wow.
The large aircraft on the bottom of the aircraft, and this is seen by multiple eyewitnesses, it has what looks to be a relieved section, kind of like someone took an ice cream scooper and scooped out the bottom of this aircraft. That is to allow for a parasitic aircraft to sit conformally tucked up inside the bottom of the mothership. So right around Mach 1.2, they would release from the mothership that's powered by 6 Pratt & Whitney J93 engines at about Mach 1.2 at somewhere around 30,000 feet. From that point, the parasitic aircraft, which measures approximately 90 feet in length and has a crew of 1, can use its linear aerospike engines to go up to Mach 20. And that's how they can be seen and do these missions. That's what may have been booming the Catalina Island area in the early 90s, going up through the LA basin, through Edwards Air Force Base, near Tonopah and Area 51 on Thursday mornings, always on the Thursday morning and at the last part of the month. That's usually when they were tested. And the reason why that is because Thursday mornings are reserved for test flights, because Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is the pre-flight, Thursday's the test flight, Friday's debrief, and generally during the late 1980s, early 1990s, there were nobody at the base at that time on weekends. So that's why Thursdays are reserved for test flights. So in a nutshell, it's a Black Star program. According to Bill Scott in the March 2006 issue of Aviation Week, that program may have been shelved. We don't know that for sure, but there's a lot of eyewitnesses who have seen both the parasitic aircraft and the mothership, so we can take it to the bank that there was such a program. As far as the status of the program right now, we don't know.
Wow. And again, just like we've said throughout the program, this was in 1992.
Correct.
What do they have now?
Oh, that's true. Here's one of the articles right here. This is from local news, Metro LA Times, and this is 4/17/1992. It says, "Secret is out on Quakes. It's a spy plane. Analysts believe that Aurora," it's not called Aurora, "a craft that can travel 4,000 miles per hour, could be the cause of frayed morning nerves." And so there's just article after article about these booms just waking up LA residents in the early 1990s. So they definitely have made a breakthrough. The SR-71 is not the fastest aircraft anymore at this time, and that aircraft has still remained classified to this day.
Well, now, okay. Throughout this show, we have been talking about aircraft that, really, I mean, they're using conventional, or what we would call conventional, types of jet engines. Have you run across anything that shows that we've gone beyond that we've actually achieved, fuel propulsion technology, or the ability to go quickly outside of the atmosphere, and really do have a secret space program within the solar system?
Well, to answer that question, I just wanted to follow up on the fantastic research by Linda. She's so well versed in this. But just to get back to the Hudson Valley Boomerang, it was the March 24th, 1983 Taconic State Parkway, which was on a Thursday, that there were literally hundreds of people that pulled off to the side of the road, slammed on their brakes, got out of their car, and were looking at this gigantic boomerang chevron V-shaped craft that was hovering over the Taconic State Parkway silently, and then shining these beaming spotlights down on the cars below like it was looking for something. And this went on multiple times. This wasn't the only time. And one thing I want to point out, and you guys talked about this earlier, is the flight characteristics of this particular craft. when it did this is March 24th, 1983. It started out south of Millwood and worked its way northbound until it got to Yorktown Heights, and it was hugging the Taconic State Parkway, making this zigzagging maneuver as it was going northbound, like it wanted to be seen. And then the point I want to bring out, and Linda has already mentioned this as well, those eyewitnesses that saw both the planes flying together that were trying to mock this Hudson Valley boomerang, and the same eyewitnesses who saw the actual UFO craft, when they compared notes, there was no comparison. They saw two completely different vehicles. There was no confusing one for the other. That's the point. And the way I try to highlight this over the radio, the best way to do this that I can think of is if you took a brand new white sheet of 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and then you break out 5 multicolored magic markers, and you draw like 10 dots on this paper: red, green, yellow, blue, and maybe orange. You can just pick 5 different colors and make 10 dots on this piece of paper. When you're done with that, turn the piece of paper over so the dots are facing the table that you just drew these on. Now take a number 2 pencil and stab that piece of paper right through the center, and then with your index finger and your thumb, with the paper being impaled on that pencil, spin that piece of paper. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see that all those dots that you drew, they all move perfectly in formation, like they're embedded in concrete. That is the flight characteristic that people saw during the Taconic State Parkway. You absolutely cannot get that kind of level of accuracy with planes flying in formation. That's why we know that this was one single craft and not ultralights, not Cessnas, not Pipers flying in formation. It's a done deal.
So we're dealing with an aircraft then that is using a really exotic technology.
Well, we not only that, but the same type of bottom understructure and this similar type of beaming light shining down was also seen on the January 5th, 2000 sighting and on the Belgium Triangle. But on the January 5th, 2000 sighting, when the lights were shining down, they didn't hit the ground. They stopped halfway. So there's a technology there. Now, again, I'm not saying that all of it's man-made. Probably a major majority of it. And Linda talked about earlier, 1909, Skunkworks didn't even exist back then. So who is building these? But just going by the eyewitness reports and nothing else, just the eyewitness reports, we are absolutely dealing with a single piece of a craft that is a chevron, twice as large as a football field in many cases. Ed Burns concurs with that. He's no longer with us, but he said he's sure that this is one solid craft. We've got multiple eyewitnesses in the Night Siege book that talk about how they have no doubts that they're dealing with one simple solid craft.
I remember seeing film that was taken at a Soviet Air Force base, probably I think it was in the early 1970s. That had been released, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. A lot of UFO papers and films and things like that got released. But this movie, I mean, it showed people on the tarmac of this Air Force base looking up in the sky, and there was a white chevron aircraft flying over this base, very high up, looking nothing like any kind of aircraft that I had ever seen before. And like I said, this took place in probably in the early 1970s. So so obviously somebody has had this kind of technology for quite a while.
Well, Tim, you've written about Nikola Tesla. In fact, I think you've been doing some secret research and projects recently that we'll soon hear about. Now, do you think that Tesla could have been involved in some of this?
Well, I don't think he was personally. Yeah, but I mean, he definitely, in his research and experiments, he definitely ran across, effects that we would now call field propulsion, or some people have called it electrogravitics. And definitely a lot of his material. Before he died, was stolen probably by the German spy system that was established on the East Coast in the or the middle of the late 1930s. But then you had the United States after he died. I mean, they got a hold of several truckloads, like 80 barrels of material from Tesla that supposedly had information about his more exotic research that has never been seen except for just various notes that came out of like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
He lived right around the corner here in the New Yorker Hotel. I
Yes.
often feel like going down to the basement and seeing if there's some really old boxes, laying around somewhere.
Well, apparently, from what I have been told, there is actually an elevator that goes down into a sub-basement where there is a tunnel system that leads to the train station that could take you from the New Yorker to Washington, D.C. without being seen on the surface.
I don't know. It's the problems they've been having with Amtrak and all. It seems you can't even get there by normal train half the time.
Well, the other thing about the New Yorker apparently is that the generator that they have in that building, it was put in when the building was built, but the generator can generate a power surplus. What they say is like 5 times more than the building could actually use.
Years ago, we used to have when I was running the New York School of Occult Arts and Sciences, we would actually rent one of their meeting rooms. I mean, in those days, you could rent a meeting room for $35 or $50 or something like that. And it reminds me, it was like on a dark and stormy night with a hurricane coming in. And we had one night we had a fairly small turnout, but people were very much into it. I hope they all got home all right. But yeah, we used to. I don't think I knew in those days that was a Tesla's headquarters. We weren't quite into Tesla yet at that time. This would have been in 60-ish, 64 or something like that. I don't remember the exact year. But,
yeah, nobody was remembering Tesla then.
Yeah. Well, we did a book we published. It was Nikola Tesla, Man of Mystery, which has now been reprinted as, help me out with the title here, Tim, about Otis T. Carr and Tesla.
Oh, yeah. It's called Men of Mystery.
Men of Mystery. Okay.
Men of Mystery,
okay. It used to be Man of Mystery, and now it's Men of Mystery.
Men of Mystery, yeah. Otis Carr and Nikola Tesla, yeah.
But now we've had Tesla was off flying to Mars and stuff. But what was Crenshaw? Dennis Crenshaw. Didn't he write a book about some secret society or club that actually had working aerial devices before the turn of? I was going to say the turn of the century, but which one we don't, turn of 1900.
We had Walter Bosley on our show a month or so ago, remember? And he was talking about his research into the Serona Aerial Club, in California.
Yes.
Their research went back maybe as far as pre-Civil War on kind of like exotic flying machines, not just the kite-like structures of the Wright brothers.
Oh no. Now, Michael, how about some of these rather exotic theories that go along with the exotic aircraft? that they could have bases underground, or they could have bases on the dark side of the moon, or inside the Earth. Any credence to any of those?
Let me give you the words of the Skunkworks Vice President and General Manager, Rob Weiss. This is from page 196 of a new book called The Projects of the Skunkworks. So you're getting this directly from the horse's mouth. He says here on page 196, quote, about 80% of the group's work is classified. The other 20% we can talk about. So right there, what has the Skunkworks been doing the last 50 years that we don't know about? What have they been doing during the Reagan administration, during that 8-year time frame? All the billions that were poured into the Skunkworks, what did they build? That's what we need to find out.
And they're not going to let us know anytime soon. Well, it just always makes me think of, like the supposed quotes from Ben Rich, which, some people say, yeah, he said this, and then other people say, no, they were taken out of context. Like along the lines of, we have the technology now to take ET home, or what was some of the other ones is like, we've got stuff that would make the director of Star Wars drool. And so, it's just, to me, it's always fascinating to speculate, because they're not going to let us know anytime soon just exactly what they have, but as our producer has said, during our breaks, more than likely that they are using a technology that's probably at least 50 years ahead of civilian technology.
That's precisely what Ben Rich said just before he passed away. So you almost quoted him exactly correctly.
Well, unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left in our show, so I'd like to give both you and Linda a chance to tell our audience where they can find out more about you, websites, things like that. Linda, why don't you go first?
Certainly. My books are on Amazon. You can get in touch with me through my website, gotozim.com, gotozim.com. And if you would like to see Michael and I in person, we are going to be at the Western Connecticut Conference.
No way. How about that?
The Danbury Library on October 14th. It's expected to fill up quickly. If you enjoyed listening to Michael, which I certainly did tonight, you are certainly going to enjoy seeing him in person.
Well, that's a wonderful disclosure. Now, Linda, what are the titles of your books? I have one here on the zombie apocalypse. I closely guard that so it's not snatched away from you at midnight.
I'm working on the third of the trilogy of my zombie novels, but if you are interested in the UFO books, it's In the Night Sky, which there's also a documentary DVD based on that.
I can't find that anywhere. I don't know if it's been taken off the market or what. It doesn't seem to be available.
I will have to check with the production company on that. Yeah, I still have some copies that used to be available on Amazon.
They're not there anymore now.
Oh, okay. Maybe they need to print some more. And the other two books are Hudson Valley UFOs, and the latest one is more Hudson Valley UFOs.
We need more Hudson Valley. And what's the latest sighting there, just to make it quick?
Latest sighting would probably be a rectangular craft in the Pine Bush area.
All right. Good old Pine Bush. And Michael, you take it away.
Well, I can be contacted on Facebook, and all of my lectures are on YouTube, and so you can view some of the information there. But Facebook would probably be the best way.
And there is also, you can download a book that you did about crashed UFOs in Leonard Stringfield.
That is available on the MUFON website. That is correct.
Well, actually, if you just type it in on Google, it appears on about 3 websites.
It might, yeah, it might.
Yeah,
so,
it did.
Yep.
I haven't finished reading it, but it's one of the better books on the subject, and we have to have you back to talk about that topic, because we didn't really get a chance to get into it. And Tim, what is our big news of the week? We are about to release tomorrow a copy of the first book that I ever wrote and published, Inside the Saucers. It was done in 1963 and 1964, but it's an excellent book. You'd never think that a bunch of teenagers put it together. That's Inside the Saucers. And don't forget our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO's Secret Archives. And you can, of course, listen anytime to some very amazing programs on KCOR Radio. And thank you, Tina, our producer. And thank you, Tim. And thank you for our wonderful evening, Linda and Michael. And we'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.